Hey plant lovers, welcome back to the channel. I'm Dom here at Red Leaf Exotics, and on today's video, I'm going to be answering some questions a lot of people have been asking through Instagram and on here. I have them in my phone, and while I'm answering them, I'm going to be doing some light greenhouse work. I have some Venus flytraps that really need to get into pots. There's like a few of them here. Some seedlings, maybe we'll do some Nepenthes breeding, I don't know. But let's answer some questions and get into this video. Here we go. So our first question is, what direction window will you keep a Nepenthes in indoors? So, I used to grow Nepenthes in windows. It's like, I'm curious to see me repotting things and having to focus on that and answer your questions. But I'm used to keeping Nepenthes under grow lights if they're inside. You know, a southwest facing window is kind of bright. They really do like a lot of strong light. The thing that's important is if you are keeping your Nepenthes indoors and in a bright window like that, you don't want them scorching. You really want a lot of light, but you don't want that heat coming in from the sun and just scorching their leaves. I always suggest with a lot of tropical plants, especially carnivorous plants, the tropical types, to keep them under some kind of grow light. It's going to give them strong light, it's going to give them consistent light, and usually a light that's not going to burn or hurt them like the sun could through a window. So if you don't have a grow light option, I would opt for brighter's better, a southwest facing window maybe. Just make sure if it's the hottest part of the day, like around 3, between 1 and 3, that you are keeping your plants a little off to the side. You really don't want that bright light burning their leaves. Now get a little breath of air and get this little fly trap in its pot of peat moss. When I pot the fly traps up like this, I grew all these from seed from outside. I just put them in pure peat in a little 2-inch pot. They get this big from seed in less than a year, and I keep them sitting in water all the time. And then when I'm potting them with the peat, I make sure to wet the peat first so that it's a little, not really muddy, but you know, it's wet and moist, and that makes it easier to pack in the pot and put the plant in there. If you put just dry peat moss in here, it's so hard to wet. So always pre-moisten your peat moss before potting your fly traps or other carnivorous plants. Our second question up here is, what advice would you give your younger self having the experience growing Neps right now? I think the first thing that comes to my mind is Nepenthes are plants, just like every other plant. And although they aren't petunias or little garden bedding plants, I feel like the basics for plants is the same: water, food, light. And I think for me, when I started noticing my best growth on the Nepenthes specifically, was when I did that. When I started treating them like plants, when I stopped fussing over every little thing or a little burnt leaf or a little dead tendril. Just let the plants grow, give them consistency, feed them, and they should grow like every other plant. Of course, if you're shifting your conditions and you're dropping your humidity and you're shocking the plants, they're probably just never going to do well. So consistent conditions is the basis of any growing anything, even an animal. You know, they don't want to be shocked and traumatized. So just keep your conditions consistent. Give them their water when they need it. Keep it a little more simple and don't complicate it. And for me, my plants have grown the best when I kind of started to follow that practice. Here we go with some more. Ooh, this one's good. What liquid water soluble fertilizers do you recommend? So, without getting specific right away, Nepenthes and carnivorous plants in general love fertilizer. You know, for years now, there's this hype and fear about don't fertilize your plants, don't give them fertilizer, it's going to burn and kill them, and that is simply not true. I think in just the past few years, people have really realized how important fertilizer is for your carnivorous plants. When we're talking about Nepenthes, usually slow release is nice. A lot of people use Osmocote, the typical 6-month slow release. And everybody wants to hear this specific recipe and schedule to do when you're doing fertilizing? And the answer is there's no schedule. You might be a little warmer, you might be a little more wet in your soil, and if you are and you're using slow release and that's continuously like just releasing those nutrients, you could burn and hurt your plants if you're not letting them dry out. If your conditions are a little cool and the plants aren't really using the nutrients, you can burn the roots. So there's so many factors when fertilizing any plant. You know, you don't want it to be scalding hot during the day. The temperature of the water you're using, you don't want it to be using boiling hot water or freezing water and shock the roots. But as far as fertilizers go, I would say stay with something organic. A lot of people are using Max C, and although most people seem to have pretty good success with it, I noticed for me it burns some things. If it's not flushed out, it can hurt them. It does have urea in it, which is pretty much like a fake version of nitrogen. Some plants need help, you know, absorbing it. And if it's sitting there in the soil and not being used, it can definitely make your Nepenthes look a little funky. Now, one thing that I've had really good success with, especially on smaller plants, is the Alaskan fish fertilizer from Lowe's. It's organic. It smells so bad, but it works so good. The plants seem to love it. Once a month, a quarter strength, as with most fertilizers. But I would just say aim toward organic, light, and you have to experiment. Some people are jacking their plants up with fertilizer, and they look amazing. Some people are trying, and they don't look good. And, you know, it's such a tricky thing to answer and talk about, because when I say it's different for everyone, it is so different. Me and my friends, some people can't use what I use. I've tried what they use, and I just don't get the same results. So it's really all about experimenting. I would just say stay organic and stay away from synthetic fertilizers that have all that fake garbage that's probably going to kill your soil. That's one of the things I love about organic fertilizers. They're feeding the soil, they're feeding those important microbes and things that are living in there that help your plant uptake. So stay away from synthetic stuff that eventually kills your soil and can make your plants actually lock out nutrients as to where they won't be absorbing anything. And you'll usually see that very sudden, you know, discoloration in the leaves, no growth, maybe barely any roots. That can happen with Nepenthes. So organic and seaweedy/fishy seems to be best, I've noticed, with Nepenthes, unless you're using slow release fertilizer, just a prill or two. The little balls are called prills. A prill or two just right on top or under the soil surface, and give them some time, and that seems to work for most Nepenthes in my experience. That is such a deep conversation/topic, like to get into it. You know, it's really interesting to see what people have used and the success that they've had. But for me, organic and light. So anyway, moving along. What's one of our next ones? Okay, how to build a simple small highland growth chamber for maybe 1 to 2 plants. I'm going to answer this one really quick. I don't say highland and simple go together. If you're going to, you know, grow highland plants, you better go all the way in on it. You know, how are you going to cool a little box to 60 degrees or 55 degrees every night of your life? It's just honestly not possible in the long run. I've done it. I've been there, you know, loading my fish tank with ice cubes every single night to keep my velocias cold or whatever. But there's no simple setup for highland Nepenthes, true highland Nepenthes that want to get cold at night. Maybe if you live somewhere over in California or Oregon where you're getting those nice warm days and those cool night drops, that is natural highland conditions. The plants are going to love that. I would say, you know, figure something out with an air conditioner, which can be really expensive when you're talking about 1 or 2 plants. I've also seen people use, which could be the best approach, water chillers. I think there's some pretty affordable ones that could turn on at night, maybe with a automated timer, and it will cool your water in the little tank, and maybe it can cool the environment. I've never done it, so I can't give you solid advice, but I will just leave you with Highland, simple, not a good mix. Maybe try hybrids and don't even worry about the cooling. Coming along, I feel like I'm forgetting to work and I'm just answering questions, but there's a couple left. What do we got here? Best type to grow, highland, intermediate, or lowland? I would say lowland, intermediate, all hybrids. The highland species, as I just mentioned, you know, they want those night drops. They're very temperamental with condition shifts, or they can be. So lowland Nepenthes, it's a lot easier to heat and keep hot, humid tanks or grow chambers or wherever you're growing them than to cool and get highlanders cold. So any hybrids, I would say lowlands and intermediate. As far as features go, if we want to talk the best type to grow, if you can accommodate them, to me are the highland Nepenthes and the highland hybrids. Because they just get, to me, the best features. I love Edwardsiana's pure stome. I love the intermediate to highland Veitchii with its big stripe and squat fuzzy pitchers. I love Inermis's weird shape, Lowii in its uppers. Of course, Bicalcarata, Mariliana, and all those beautiful lowlands are great, but there's just nothing to me like the color and the features on most of the highland and intermediate growing Nepenthes. So easiest to grow, I would say lowland, intermediate, and hybrids. The hardest are the highlands, so depends on what you want. If you're looking for features, to me, the highland are the prettiest types of plants. I didn't even pot this one. I told you I'd get sidetracked. Our next question here is really good. Can strong fogging and continuously damp leaves be danger, even with good airflow? Yes. So if you've ever dug into the realm of, you know, greenhouse management or floriculture, it is usually, no matter what you're growing, I don't care if they're orchids from the rainforest of Highland, wherever, most plants in cultivation are just not going to be as good or tough or strong or as beautiful, especially if they're producing flowers with petals in really high, moist, constantly damp environments, even the Nepenthes. One thing I noticed with the Nepenthes, if you're keeping them too humid, too damp, sometimes they don't get as many pitchers, or sometimes the pitchers get all that black mold over them, which is so unsightly, even though it doesn't harm them. And it can cause root rot, fungus problems, even though Nepenthes come from humid environments and they're so tough against many funguses, they can get different kind of funguses that we have that they might not see in their natural habitat that you might have in the greenhouse or from a plant you're growing in your collection. So moist, wet, fogginess all the time is really bad. And if we want to connect this back to fertilizing, to my understanding, if you have a lot of moisture in the air all the time, a lot of water, the stomata or the pores on the leaf that open and close during the night and day to, you know, release gases or take in nutrients, they're going to get really weak if you have high humidity and moisture on the leaf. So the plant technically can't, you know, exchange gases or even sweat, which leads to it not even being able to take up nutrients efficiently. It goes into growing plants hard in a greenhouse, which means you're growing them drier, tougher. They get a waxier, tougher cuticle on the leaf. Very deep stuff to get into, but in short, very bad idea to have a lot of water and moisture and fog in the air on your Nepenthes leaves or any plant leaf, even with good airflow. You know, even when you're in the jungles and the highland forest, a lot of plants are getting their moisture early in the morning, maybe an afternoon shower, but a lot of it's coming at night, early morning, and that's why here in the greenhouse, I'll water early in the morning, the overhead watering comes on, and it just wets everything like a rain shower, and these plants do not get a drop of water for the rest of the day until the next morning, and that is not continuous. Once it is winter and we start getting less daylight, it gets cooler, the overhead gets shut off, and these plants may be spot watered. So a lot of time and attention going into that, but not a lot of water and fog on the leaves. And I think if you acclimate your plants to that, you're going to see a huge difference. Our next question up here is, what are the tricks to growing monster traps, say like Raja? Pitcher size, coloration, form. A lot of that is dependent on your conditions, the temperature, the humidity, but it also depends on the plant or hybrid. You know, truncata, most of them get huge pitchers. Raja gets huge pitchers. You could grow Raja maybe in this greenhouse and it would love it because everything is tied in, it's automated, the conditions are perfect. You can grow Raja in a lowland container and it might, you know, die, never get big pitchers. So the conditions obviously are always the basis to everything. But for me to get my biggest, hugest, most gargantuan pitchers, fertilizer, consistency, and just, I guess, a lot of love. Some of these plants here do not get bigger pitchers until they start producing, you know, their vine. They'll vine up, they'll get a base growth, they'll get a vine, they'll get a base growth, and it might be 5 years later, and I have the biggest pitcher I've ever had because they're growing on that old root stock, and it just can supply them with so much more nutrients and energy. So that is how you pretty much get big pitchers. Putting them in the right conditions, picking the perfect types that do get big pitchers, and feeding them, which I mentioned earlier about the fertilizers. So I hope that helps. I switched out my Venus flytraps. They were literally just a little pile. Now I'm working on this tray that looks like shit. But these are just leftovers. I've already combed through this. And these are Loevicia bashiana burbigiae cross Loevicia tivii platykyla. Let me see if I could pick one to show you guys. Growing over here, you could see how big and healthy these ones are. These were just so little that I usually leave them behind, and I'll come back around like I am now and getting them potted up. Let's see, which parent gives the most physical characteristics, the flower owner or the pollen donor? So, in my experience, usually many plants take more after the female parent. However, it really depends. Like, a really interesting scenario is Loei truncata and truncata cross Loei. To me, I could really see the difference. The truncata cross Loei tend to be a little more red and green in the pitcher, especially once they start to mature. Both Loei truncata and truncata Loei can have nice deep purple lowers and stuff when they're immature and medium size, but once they start to get bigger and elongate and get their true form, Loei truncata tends to have a more color if it does, and a lot more Loei influence, as to where truncata Loei is nice, but I don't think they're as nice as Loei cross truncata. If you're doing things like a primary, like Loei cross blah-de-da-de-da-de-da, it could look like both parents. It is so hard to really say, but I would say, in my experience from a few plants that I know of that are, you know, Loei truncata, truncata Loei, or Veitchii Loei, Loei Veitchii, I always love a nice, strong female parent. And then there's going to be some stuff you mix together, and it doesn't really matter. They both look good. But I would say the female parent is more dominant. As I've been answering that question, I am chopping up some sphagnum moss here, and I'm just using scissors. I just want to get it down to a more manageable size so it's not big, long, and stringy. And I only have a couple here, so I don't mind using just these hand shears. It's more fluffy, and I have a little bit of perlite here I'm going to be adding in. Roughly like 60% sphagnum, 40 perlite. It really depends on your conditions. You're going to hear me say that a lot. How dry you are, how moist you are. But I'm just mixing a little bit of perlite in here, and I'll show you what it looks like for these seedlings. It's not a ton. You could see, oops, perlite-y. You could see the nice little flecks, but very sphagnum-y. And once I get them from this cell tray into here, oh my God, just in a couple weeks, you'll notice them explode in growth, which is really nice to see. These ones are finally big enough to do this with. Moving on to more questions. I think the last one I saw was, when is the next EP import? Our Exotica plants imports are always spring and fall, around February, March, or October, September, October. So always spring and fall, and we do post a lot when they're going down, so just keep an eye out. One of our next questions here is, what do you do to prevent a pest outbreak? Aphids, thrips, mites, blah-de-da-de-da. Don't let one happen in the first place, but it really depends. It depends on the pest, how many you have. I am so anal here in the greenhouse. Even before I go to bed, I don't care how many plants are in here. I check every leaf. I'm looking at things. I'm very like an eagle. I look in the crowns. I check the roots. I'll pull plants out of the pot, look and see what's there. What to use? Again, it depends on what you have, but I've dealt with mealybug, thrips, mites, you know, your common pests. And now being here in Tennessee, even in Brooklyn, when you start getting warmer and spring comes in and summer hits and it's really warm and humid in the greenhouse, that is when everybody wants to come in and have a feast on the plants. But I'd say the biggest thing is just being preventative. If you see a little aphid, a mite, whatever, crush it, kill it, get some alcohol, rub it off the leaf. If it's a bigger problem, I mean, what can I suggest? This is a very tricky one too. Neem oil seems to be a popular remedy for a lot of things. If you're in a greenhouse, you really have to put it on maybe late at night, early in the morning. You don't want neem oil on your leaves when that sun's coming through, because Nepenthes specifically, I've seen them burn and do really weird stuff with neem oil. It's supposed to be really good. It's organic, depending on the mixture you have. I think there's 70% neem oil, there's 90%. Neem oil seems to be a good deterrent. If you have even worse symptoms and you just can't get rid of it, people have used Baron 1. I don't use it. I really try to not use anything. I one time used a chemical, I think it's Safari. That seemed to kill everything, and it seems to be like a commercial standard pesticide. The thing that I hate so much about pesticides is most of them are really bad. And even a lot of the organic ones, I don't want to push you in either direction. Some of the organic ones just seem sometimes a little weak when you're treating an outbreak of something, in my experience. Especially thrips and mealybugs are notorious for becoming resistant to different applications, even powerful chemicals. So another thing that I'm going to be experimenting with, and I do want to say I don't have many problems with pests here. The very little things I've seen, you know, I've sprayed some neem oil or used alcohol. I've tried the Safari for mites that I couldn't get to go away, and they did go away after that. But all of that stuff, like I said, I just feel like it's so dangerous for people to use and just be around. And no matter what you're using, make sure you wear your protective gear, because it can blow around and get in your lungs and all that bad stuff. But Bear 3-in-1, I've heard. What else? Avid is a popular one for mites. But again, all of this stuff is just so powerful. I'd say to prevent them, check your plants every day. Don't just leave dead pitchers and dead foliage everywhere. Look at them. Check the soil. Don't just leave them all piled together. You have to check your plants if you want to keep pests out. So management is the best form to prevent any pests from getting in. As far as what chemicals and treatment you use, that is up to you. I've, like I said, not really been using anything beside my eyes and some alcohol on a Q-tip. One thing I do want to get into is predatory mites. Just releasing them in the greenhouse, having them live in here and just be in the environment in case something does come up. You know, the more plants you get, the harder it gets to stay on top of everything. And I don't know about what most other growers are doing, but from my understanding, people use preventative, you know, weekly, bi-weekly treatments, and I don't want to be around that. So just keep your eyes on them and peel them off, pick them off. And if you need something more powerful, make that choice on your own. The next question is, what is my favorite plant outside of Nepenthes? That's a really hard question. I don't think I have one outside of Nepenthes. Nepenthes are my favorite, and outside of them, like, so many. If I can get you into a little ballpark of my favorite ones, anthuriums. I love anthuriums. Anthurium warricanum. Oh my God, the leaves on that thing. Philodendron spiritus sancti is beautiful. Oh my God, I have to show you guys something. I'm going to be right back. Just wait. I don't think this is my favorite one, but I think it's going to become a favorite one. And I recently got it from a grower in Florida, and I'm going to show you guys this plant, and I'm so excited to have it. But it's Alocasia Jacqueline, or what most of the locals like to call it, Tanderusa. Oh, this thing is beautiful. Oh my God, I love it. Big elkhorn foliage. I like how it kind of is pleated in like that. And these are a little fuzzy. There's a lot of hairs coming off them, different trichomes, and beautiful dark purplish undersides. This plant is so beautiful. And I love all the modeling on the stem, but I'm gonna put it back. Alocasias, the pot fell off. Alocasias, anthuriums, they're my next in line outside of the carnivorous plants. I also have a sweet tooth for different things like bromeliads. This is a Catopsis berteroniana, and these are carnivorous. They get these glaucous shingles on their leaves, and when insects or whatever get on there, they slide down, and there's water in here, and they do have carnivorous digestive enzymes that help them break down stuff. So really cool plants. I also love orchids a lot. I'd say one of my favorite orchid species are the Phragmipedium Bessii. I love the red color on them. They grow all over the greenhouse. I don't know if there are any in flower right now. It doesn't look like it, but they get beautiful fluorescent bright red flowers, and they definitely captivate my heart. I love them. But Nepenthes, favorite, and there's so much outside that. The next question's interesting. How did me and my boyfriend Brian meet? We met, he was a model, I'm a photographer, well, I was, and I photographed him in my greenhouse. We became really good friends, and after 2 or 3 years, one thing led to another, and we began dating. And here we are. Thank you for filming this. You're welcome. Next question is, what is the best way to acclimate Bical crata, especially if it's new? They can definitely be a trickier plant to acclimate. In the greenhouse, they're lowland, they have very thin leaves, especially when they're little, and they need a lot of humidity. They don't want a lot of light right away. I see a lot of growers that will get them new, and their plant just wilts so fast. They need a ton of humidity to get them going, get them settled, and they don't really want to be really dry in the air. When we get them in, or growing them, the ones we have gotten in, they sometimes sulk for a while, maybe a couple months before they start doing anything. They definitely crash harder than most plants that I've seen come into the greenhouse, and that, you know, goes with a lot of lowland, thin little papery leaves. If you're growing Bical, I would say you should have some solid lowland conditions set up so that it's kind of like a brightish, shady, hot sauna with some air circulation and not too wet in the feet. Just leave it there, consistency, and it should start responding. It's really hard to recommend any one specific thing. I could say put it in a bag and put it, you know, off to the side, and maybe it could rot for you. I could say leave it out in the open and let it go. It is so hard. You know, a lot of people just want very specific answers sometimes, but I have seen so many different things happen to plants in different situations. But overall, good heat, consistency, a lot of humidity in the air without keeping the plant itself too wet, and you should see it start to respond and grow. And once you get the hang of them and they do start growing, Bical is not a hard plant to grow. Hope that helps. Well, I feel like I barely got any work done. I was just kind of like playing with stuff as I was answering. But I'll answer one more questions for you guys. And someone wanted me to talk about heating. It's going to depend on where you are. When I lived in Brooklyn, I loved the heaters that I had. So I had a 14 by 24 foot polytunnel, and I had 4. They're called Dr. Infrared space heaters. They're made for greenhouses. They're green, they're coated. They worked amazing. I even was pretty bad with getting them splashed and wet. And they went for a really long time until I had any issues with one shorting out or whatever, like a couple years. So those are good for a small space as long as you don't splash them all the time. But now in these larger greenhouses, we're using Modine heaters, which are a very common and popular heater unit to use in any commercial greenhouse. Keep them high above the plants. Don't get a lot of moisture around them. I've noticed with the Modine type, they have a lot of problems with the sensor getting clogged up or backed up or too much humidity and moisture, and they can have a hard time starting. We've been through it with some of these, but we do use the Modine heaters. And in the lowland, we keep it a little more misty in the winter because it's running a lot. We need to keep it, 70 and 80 degrees, and we can have issues with all that humidity in that little enclosed tunnel. Here in the highland, sometimes, even though I usually say this is a big no-no, if I know the heater's gonna be running all night in the dead of winter, I will sometimes water, just give them a nice splash at night before I go to bed, and that humidity and moisture usually keeps them overnight. Again, I usually never suggest moistening things, especially at nighttime when things come a-lurkin', but that's what we use as a heater. And those Dr. infrared space heaters were so awesome. At least when I used them, they've gotten the Brooklyn greenhouse through some pretty cold nights that were in the single digits. And the way they heat the air keeps it a little more humid. They don't take a lot of humidity out of the air. The Modine heaters, you could get gas or propane. They are a little more of a moisture wet heat. They're not bad, but I think those Dr. infrared ones were pretty good. Well, it's time to get out of here. It's the jaw getting numb. It's getting a little dark. I want to go enjoy the plants. But I hope this has really helped answer some of your questions, give you a better understanding of the direction you want to go in and what you want to do with your Nepenthes and plants. I'm Dom here at Red Leaf Exotics. If you have any more specific questions, leave them on below. It is getting a little harder to get to them, but it's a good thing. I'll do my best. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next week.